It's time to welcome to the show a first-time guest. He is a attorney that has a very unique specialty. He has, of course, during the course of his career, argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, along with numerous court appeals, including in front of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Ken W. Good. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. And to make sure I don't forget later as we're wrapping things up, not only I appreciate you being here, but Merry Christmas to you, sir. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show, and Merry Christmas to you as well.
Some people take the straight path in life, but at Arizona State University, we respect your twists and turns. They make our online students more driven to excel in their professional lives. That's why our personalized suite of services empowers you with innovative resources and staff that sticks with you. Make your next turn with one of our 300-plus programs at ASU, #1 in innovation for 9 consecutive years. Visit us at asuonline.asu.edu to learn more.
What's up, California? If you're like me, you work hard for your money, and you want to know how to keep it safe. The best way to do that is by doing your own research. Here are a few of my tips to help you get started, like avoid spending or investing more than you can afford to lose. Avoid sending money to someone you don't know or haven't met in person. And finally, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Protect your money by doing your research. Get started at dfpi.ca.gov/consumers. Brought to you by the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. One of the things that I think we often kind of overlook is the legality side when we're talking about the reform efforts with bail. And as it turns out, you happen to be a bail law expert, which is a very unique kind of specialty. In fact, there are very few people that operate in that expertise. So before we jump into the topic itself, because there's a lot of opinions, some people very strongly opinionated, even without much consideration about the nuance of the legal side, how is it that you ended up kind of focused on bail law?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I graduated from law school over 30 years ago. I started out representing doctors in hospitals when they got sued. But I have always had an appellate interest. For some reason, I've always excelled in arguing cases at the Court of Appeals or the appellate courts. Even in law school, they have competitions, and I always excelled better in moot court with appellate type competitions. And so whatever I've done, I've always had that kind of appellate tint. And so when I do it representing doctors in hospitals, I still did appellate work. And so when I went to a section on new and important cases from the courts of appeals, and like the 5 cases turned out to be my cases. And so that's carried on. And so someone got in trouble with a bond issue. And someone asked them, what kind of attorney do you need to hire? And someone said, well, you need an appellate attorney. And so they hired me, and I straightened that out for them, and then just word of mouth spread. And so I started representing more clients on bond-related issues. And so I'm now Texas counsel for several surety companies, and I represent bail bondsmen across the state of Texas. But then there was this really big issue in Houston and Harris County in a federal court, and I was asked to go to the hearing, and I went, and it became very clear to me that the case was going south, and that I thought the judge was making the wrong decision in that case. And so I came out and started calling people and saying, this case, calling a red alarm fire, and telling people we needed to become experts on these issues. And so I set out to become very knowledgeable in the issues that are raised in these types of cases. And as a result of that, my initial prediction turned out to be correct, the judge in that case has now been reversed 5 or 6 or even more times on these very issues in the very case that I was there sitting in. So I just have had that tense, and I've always used it in whatever area of law I'm practicing or specializing in, and I set about to become knowledgeable on these cases, and now have written numerous articles on those types of issues.
Yeah. Well, it certainly sounds like a very unique set of circumstances that led to a very unique specialty. So, yeah, it's. I find myself often kind of wavering back and forth. Now, as a conservative show host, I tend to be highly critical of a lot of these DAs. Strangely enough, a lot of them seem to get backing from the same source. We're not really supposed to say his name because it means that we're being anti-Semitic, even though that doesn't really seem to matter to the left too much at the moment. I digress. The thing here is with this, I can see some situations, some circumstances where the folks that are pro bail reform that leads down to kind of the zero bail ideology, they'll make a legitimate argument, or at least I'm willing to concede in some cases it is, that it feels like an additional punishment, that it's unfair, that it's too much, because it is part of the deterrent. And a lot of us people, I'm saying probably somewhere around 40 or over, we're very much cognitive of the fact that our judicial system was intended to be a system that put those discouraging roadblocks to try and keep people from committing crimes, to give as much deterrence as possible. But if you acknowledge that it's that way in some cases, then you have to look at how you draw a line. But it really feels like, Ken, and you can correct me if you feel like I'm off the rails here on any part of this, by the way, but it feels like there's something else at play in a lot of these cases, that these people aren't necessarily looking to try to find those instances where it's excessive, but they're really just looking at a way to try and tear down the system itself and maybe even a little bit of society. And I think that we tend to overreact to that to some degree, to ignore that there's some good. But it really does feel like a net negative for society as a whole, but in particular in the places where they've really put this into effect. Your thoughts on any part of that, all of it, or am I just completely nuts?
You are not completely nuts. I agree with a lot that what you've said, or agree with a lot of what you said. I think that there's merit to the argument that this is a coalition to make reform, and part of that coalition wants to create chaos, because out of chaos you create decriminalization. And I think that that's what's driving a lot of this. I think a lot of the arguments that reasonable people would say have merit are not even true. I mean, to say today that we have first-time offenders that are in jail that can't get out, that's just absolutely, baloney. Jails are crowded as a result of COVID. They're crowded with very dangerous people. First-time offenders, they're no longer in jail, and you can see that clearly with these charitable bail funds across the country that are finding themselves and getting in trouble, because they're finding that there's no people like that in jail. So who are they bailing out? They're bailing out the really dangerous people, and they're getting in trouble because they're going out and killing people, and now they're getting sued by those families because they should have never been bonded out. So I think, what we're really talking about is criminal justice reform, and the bail reform part of it, which was probably one of the first things they pushed, was really the low-hanging fruit. Who doesn't? I mean, they're the easy target. Everybody wants to attack the bail industry or the bail side of the release mechanism of how we get people out of jail but back to court. Because, we're always looking for alternatives. We always want to make the system better. The problem is the reason why the private bail industry has been around for 200 years is because there's not an alternative that works as well and does as good of a job, that doesn't just create complete chaos. And we're finding that over and over again across the country, especially like in Illinois. We have already been through that once where they got rid of the private surety bail system, and then all they had left was, cash bail, and that's just putting up cash or a percentage of the cash with the courts. And the Safety Act got rid of that just recently. And so crime was already going up as a result of the first wave. Crime is now going up again. And it's actually, you can see it. The people who look at these issues would look and say, when that happened, crime was going to go up. That was what was going to happen. We now have studies that show that support that. And so where that's happening now, you have to say it's not really anything other than politics. And that's what where courts or counties or states are implementing these things now. You have to say it's just over politics. It doesn't have anything to do with crime because or criminal justice reform, because crime is going to go up as a result. That's been proven now.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it would have been common sense to begin with. And I know a lot of people like myself started screaming that over the airwaves as soon as we heard the first DA that was looking to do that. And there's no real joy in trying to get to the I told you so part of the argument, because in this particular case, that means that people that don't deserve to be hurt are being hurt. We're not talking about people that are out there jaywalking. We're talking about violent individuals that are being turned loose to go back and reoffend. And there's been so many cases over the last 2 years alone of individuals that were brought in after committing a violent act against someone back on the streets 4 hours or less later and recommitting or doing something even worse. And that seems like it's still not resonating enough in some of these communities, but we are starting to see a change. It's just coming really, really slow. But when we talk about the difference between the political side of it and the judicial side of it, is there, and I'll let you go address the earlier comments too afterwards, but is there ever a point where this might have actually made sense from a legal point that someone should have at least experimented with this, or does it just seem like a bad idea from the start, from your experience?
I think it's a bad idea from the start. If you go back all the way and trace back all these reforms to their genesis, you go all the way back to California, where they quit building jails, quit building capacity, and they got to 200% 200% of their capacity was full in California state prisons. And so there was some litigation over that, and they were ordered to release a certain percentage of their jail population because the court ruled they were not capable of providing medical care to that number of people. So it didn't have anything to do with crime. It didn't have anything to do with they've been reformed. It was all over this medical ability to provide medical care. That issue went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the conservative side lost. And so it was upheld. And so the very first push for reform and release of criminals from jail didn't have anything to do with, well, releasing them will make us safer. That's just an argument that came up after the fact as, oh, yeah, you will be safer by releasing more people from prison. I mean, that's been proven to be not true at every step of that we've gone. I mean, if you have more people released from jail, you're going to have more crime. If you want to reduce crime, you got to hold people accountable and you got to put them in jail. And so all the problems that are going on in California has really been to further reduce their criminal prison population because they don't have the political will to build more capacity in their prisons. And as long as they're not willing to build more prisons, then they are going to have a crime problem, because now they're at the point where they have an 80% failure to appear rate in misdemeanor court, and they can't hold anybody accountable. That creates chaos because that creates huge backlogs. The only way they can address the backlogs, since no one's coming to court, is to dismiss the cases. That gives a green light for criminals to commit more crime, and then they get more brazen, and so it's more brazen crime, which becomes more felonies. That's the reason why they're reducing some felonies to misdemeanors, so they can make it look like they're reducing crime, but they're just moving the numbers. And as they get more brazen, they commit worse crimes, which is the reason why the prisons or the county jails are full. They're full of very dangerous people who've already committed serious crimes, but now they don't have any room to reinstate accountability. And so we're at this point where look at car thefts. Car thefts are up 30% year over, and that's the most accurate statistic we have on crime, because insurance companies will not pay off until there's a police report. And so all these other statistics that we see, and that where they're playing games with the numbers because people don't report those as crimes anymore, or we're no longer punishing them as crimes anymore, so we play with those numbers. Just forget all that and look at the crimes on car thefts. Those are through the roof, and that's the biggest barometer of where we are. And when you have the NAACP in Oakland saying we need a state of emergency because crime is out of control, then you know you have a crime problem. But we still have people on the left saying, oh, no, we just have a perception problem. The crime is actually going down. No, it's not. Anywhere we've initiated these bad bail reforms, crime is through the roof.
Join us Wednesday, December 20th as the LA Kings celebrate their second mini bobblehead night of the season, presented by CHLA. All fans in attendance will receive a Quentin Byfield mini bobblehead free just for being part of the action. Grab your tickets now at lakings.com.
Coastal Kids Pediatrics is a family of pediatricians for a lifetime of health, offering only the best for your children. With multiple locations throughout Orange County and Los Angeles County, and still growing. We operate our clinics with varying hours, including weekends, and are available to our patients 24/7, 365 via telemedicine and application-driven technology. Virtual appointments available. Coastal Kids Pediatrics. Superior care every step of the way. Visit coastalkids.com. That's coastalkids.com.
Yeah, it's really funny how, and when I say funny, I mean it's not funny at all, but how some of these folks will try to justify these things, even to the point that they will blame everybody but the people committing the crimes. In fact, I'm sure you remember, it's only been a few months since the last time we added 2 new car makers onto the list of about 7 manufacturers now that they blame for the increase in car thefts because they just make their cars too easy to steal. That is their fault, not the criminal. If we can't hold people accountable for their own actions, then we have to expect bad things are going to start happening. And then when we don't have any level of deterrence that's considered to be acceptable, then we should expect that if you're not deterring something, then you're actually encouraging it. One of the other things that I think pointed out, and we'll have to try to hit this real quick, is actually the fact you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I would love to get a little more from you on this, and that's the fact that a lot of people, and I've heard this argument a lot when it comes to trying to get the zero bail policies pushed, actually blames the bail industry itself, that somehow you guys aren't, when I say you guys, I mean the bail industry, not necessarily you, that they're in it for the profit and like they're making cash hand over fist. But it's really, when you look at the number of people that don't show and all the other things that kind of come into play, it's never been a high profit industry as far as I can tell. So I'd like you to speak just a little bit on that before we start moving towards wrapping up.
Sure. Let's use some simple numbers to explain the difference between the private industry and these simple release mechanisms that have been such a failure. So the private bail industry, on average, has a less than 10% failure to appear rate. So it means out of every 1,000 people who are required to come to court, less than 100 people fail to show up. Versus the simple release mechanisms, which have a 50% failure to appear rate, or like in California, the misdemeanor courts have an 80% failure to appear rate, or in Harris County, misdemeanor courts have an 80% failure to appear rate, according to HarrisCountyCourtWatch.com. And you can see very quickly in our urban areas where 1,000 people showing up in a week is just normal. I mean, that's what's being required. And if they don't come, then you can see very quickly the difference between 100 and 800 people not showing up for court. And every week on average, the same number of cases are being added to this conveyor belt of the criminal justice system. And so the type of release mechanism you use has a significant impact on your ability to resolve cases and on your backlog. The reason why you're hearing those attacks, because the bail industry is an easy target. Nobody likes the bail industry. If we could find an alternative to the private industry bail system, we would, because it's such an easy target. But it's been around for 200 years because it does one thing and it does it very well for a whole bunch of different reasons. You know, originally in Illinois, they got rid of the private bail industry years before the Safety Act, and their argument was very similar. Well, we're just going to get rid of the middleman. Well, no, they didn't get rid of the middleman. They got rid of everything when they got rid of the private surety bail system, and they went from a less than 10% failure to appear rate to at least 50% or even higher. And so now it's even worse with getting rid of cash bonds. So you can see that the reason why they want to attack the private industry bail so much is because once they do that, get rid of it, any alternative is going to create chaos. And from that chaos, you're going to give so many opportunities for decriminalization, because you have to keep from having your system collapse. That creates a green light for criminals to commit more crime. And you're tying the hands of judges, which I understand the argument by some people thinking that's noble, but when you tie the hands of judges in the name of you don't want to harm poor people, you're tying the hands of judges so they can't address gangs, career criminals, or organized crime. And those groups have found ways to make money hand over fist in those areas. I mean, and I would argue that there's not anything more those politicians could have done if they were in the pocket of these groups to help them than the reforms they've already made.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's going to take more than any Christmas miracle that we can hope for to get the folks that are in a position to work towards solutions and corrections and legitimate forms of reform to leave the politics out of it. Too many of them are dependent
I think there
on
is hope.
the politics, I'm afraid. Well, Ken, go ahead.
I said there is hope because, we have this really good example in this case called Sanchez versus Alabama, where they lived under this system on a preliminary injunction until it was overturned on appeal. So they lived under it for 4 or 5 years, and it had all of these bad results. But when they won the appeal, they reversed it, and they re-implemented a system of accountability, and crime went back down. So the Sanchez versus Alabama model is the future. You can see it. Our mayors are starting to call for that. And there was a study recently in Portland, Oregon, where they're calling for at least a minimal re-implementation of drug crimes because they got rid of all drug crimes, and now they're having record overdoses every month, it seems like. So there is hope, and you're going to see it from the mayors first because they see the handwriting on the wall, and where we're going is not sustainable. What we're seeing is just going to continue to get worse until we change course. Politicians know it. They're just in a box. The politicians on the left are in a box because they're donors. They're big money donors, like the person that you kind of referenced, don't want it. But that cannot continue because it's getting worse. The very people they're claiming to help they're hurting that whole minority group because they're releasing criminals back into those groups and they're committing more crime because the crime is heavier in our inner cities in the minority areas. And it would just end by saying, across the country in the United States, 50% of all murders are on young black male. And by and large, the murderers are young black males as well. Somehow, this whole criminal justice reform has turned the system on its head, and now we're favoring the young black male murderer over the young black male victim. And we're releasing them back into that same community, and they're seeing it as a green light to commit more crime. That will change. It will change. It's just how long will it take? We're repeating the cycle of the 60s, and in the 80s we had a strong backlash to it, and if the left's not careful, that's exactly what's going to happen again.
All right, Ken, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it right there. I think that's a pretty good place to do a little hope for the future. Before we cut things off, though, real quick, let everybody know where they can find your work. If you've got any websites you want to share, if you invite people to follow you on social media, feel free to share your handles and which platforms.
Well, thank you very much. If people want to learn more information about these issues, they can go to pbtx.com, which is the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, so pbtx.com. We have a blog there where we highlight important stories in the criminal justice reform movement. We also highlight when things go wrong. We also have our own podcast, which is there's a link to it on our website, but if you want to go directly to it, you can go to the Bell Post, thebellpost.com, where we cover criminal justice reform issues. People want to know what the New Jersey plan is. We have an episode just explaining what the New Jersey plan is. What are the other simple release mechanisms being used across the country? We have episodes to explain it. And so we try to just educate people, legislators, and other interested parties so that they'll be knowledgeable when these groups come before them and try to get them to pass failed or bad bail reform issues.
All right. Again, thank you so very much, Ken. Godspeed to you. Keep up the good work, and we'll try to get together again sometime and continue the conversation. There's still a lot more to be said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Ken W. Good. We'll have links in the show description if you're listening there. Meanwhile, let's reset the hour, because